Okay, I've got my special edition topic here. We're going to get into politics of energy. Oh man, great idea, right? So, what kind of brought this up is I'm finding it being more and more of a problem in having discussions about energy transition is that these sort of political related controversies keep popping up and they're impeding rational discussion about renewable energy and related technologies. So the biggest issue that I see is trying to deal with the small segment of what we would call conservatives in the United States, hence my graphics here, who have a just have some kind of an issue with renewable energy. There's something about it that is causing a holdup, and I just have a hard time with it because when I look at renewable energy and I look at kind of the fundamentals of it, it seems like something conservatives should really like. But yet more and more I get some of these arguments about why it's no good. And in many cases, the conservatives are promoting technologies that are actually very bad for the very philosophies that they wish to promote. So let's just look at what conservatives value. I've got a list here. This is your kind of your standard list of these things. We may think that this is only conservatives that support this stuff, but we've also got libertarian people who are very much individualists. And then we've got many of the what we call left libertarian, where you take out some of the economic issues like a free market being universally acceptable, but everything else fits just fine. We've got things in here like health of your family and friends. Conservatives are very much in favor of that. But what that ultimately is hyper localized environmentalism. All right? We want people we know to be healthy, not exposed to pollution. It's really no different than the the environmental movement, which pushes for the same thing just on a more broad scale. So all this stuff is just very embedded and intermingled together. But ultimately, one of the ways that I like to think about this is, okay, firearms are a really big political issue in the United States. Okay, there's this certain group of people and that very much believes in the right to bear arms. All right, and even though a gun can be viewed as nothing more than a tool, there's also a philosophical basis for why the right to bear arms is so important. Okay, this is viewed in many ways as a form of security, as a form of protecting oneself and the people that you care about. Likewise, I view renewable energy exactly the same way. It's a form of security. It's a form of protecting myself and the people I care about. It's a form of economic freedom and sustainability. All right? There's a lot in common here. So, we're not as different as we might think we are. The other thing that conservatives often are skeptical of why we're changing things. Why are we making these changes? And the big problem that I see with this is that we are hyper focused on climate change. We are, when you hear news about renewable energy, they're always focused on global warming. You put solar panels in your house, oh great, you're going to reduce your carbon footprint, right? Okay, there's a lot of other reasons why we're doing this. And what we have to understand is there's a lot of historical precedents to energy transitions. We've done it many times. Either replaced one energy source with another, or we've added an energy source, or phased one out. So here I basically went out to EIA and got some data on petroleum, renewable energy, and nuclear energy. And we can see that from 1960 to 1973, we increased our oil consumption by 75%. From 1983 to 1996, we increased our nuclear energy production by 121%. From 2008 to 2021, we increased our renewable energy production by 70%. And if you break it down into solar and wind, it's going to be hundreds of percent. Hundreds of percent. So these changes are not new. It's just that renewable energy is new when it comes to the change. We've changed energy sources several times. We went from wood to coal, coal to fuel oil, oil to natural gas. We threw nuclear energy in there. We threw in renewable energy. And we've been able to do that in order to give us a benefit of some kind. Economic benefits, health benefits, security benefits, long-term sustainability benefits. I really have a problem whenever we have somebody who may identify with conservatism balk at the idea of sustainability. Right? I would think that sustainability would be very important to conservatives, making sure that in the long run that we're doing things that are, going to be able to be kept going. Too many times I think people confuse the word sustainability with pop culture. Oh, I'm going to recycle plastic bags. Oh, I'm going to, do your part, kids, and recycle your bottles. No. That's small fry, small potato stuff. We want long-term, big-scale, large sustainability efforts, and renewable energy is what's going on here. So this is just the chart of that data from the previous table from there. So renewable energy, many people I think nowadays, that especially the older ones that I have conversations with, just don't realize how far we've come with renewable energy. I think they may be thinking about where renewable energy was in 2008 or 2000 or years and years ago. It's 2023. We can't think about this stuff like it's 20 years ago, right? So the Energy Information Administration did a projection in 2012 where they thought that renewable energy would be generating, by 2035, would be generating 16% of our electricity and growing almost zero. Guess what, everybody? Renewable energy actually makes 23% of our electricity, and it's only 2022. They were way off. Same thing with natural gas. They said only natural gas would only be making 27% of our electricity. It's making 40%. And they said that by 2035, coal would be generating 39%. Guess what? It's only making 20%. So this is only 10 years old, and look how far off it is. We obviously have come a long way. If you go back into the 2000s and you look at the projections for renewable energy, that they were absolutely dismal. Like they thought that nothing was going to happen. It's hilariously how bad it was. Either EIA or IEA or any of the BP statistical review, any of these things, all these future projections, they thought that renewable energy was just going to be a flash in the pan. And it is definitely not the case. All right? We have to ask ourselves, why is that? Is it because some goody two-shoes, hippy, dippy, commie pinko said that, we need to stop global warming? That's not the story. Okay. So let's look at some of the things that are good about renewables. We've got self-reliance. Most conservatives, I would think, say self-reliance is a good trait to have, either as an individual or a family or a community, whatever it is. Try to reduce your reliance upon external resources, especially ones that come from a government. Okay, classic libertarianism there. Give a man a fish, he's fed for a day. Teach a man to fish, he's fed for life. What does that mean? That's very, very applicable to renewable energy. Why? because renewable energy sources are not consumable items that you have to purchase or mine or extract or drill. It's equipment. It's tools. It's like a gun. It's actually even better than a gun because a gun needs ammunition. Solar panels don't need anything. Once you have them, you put it outside and it lasts for 30 to 40 years or whatever it is, and it creates electricity from the light as it hits the solar panel. There's no moving parts. It doesn't use any water. There's no fuel. You don't have to put gas in it every day. You don't have to, it's a truly amazing technology. All right? It's one of the, and the thing with it is, the thing that really sucks about it is it's boring. And when I say that that's a bad thing, is because people look at it and they just don't appreciate it. They don't realize how impressive it is to have just this flat piece of glass that converts sunlight into electricity that can power all these things that we care about. But because it doesn't have moving and clanking and banging and screaming parts, we think that it isn't really valuable. That's kind of the feeling that I get from, well, you need nuclear power, you need a screaming gas engine, or you need a coal-fired power plant with big smokestacks and all this stuff to get your energy. Turns out you don't. All right? That's a great advantage. That's a really good thing. So, if we look at The Simpsons, I like to use examples from The Simpsons in a lot of these discussions because The Simpsons had a few good energy tropes associated with it, because you got Montgomery Burns, who ran the nuclear plant. You've got the Lisa, the environmentalist kid, stuff, and then Homer. The thing that The Simpsons kind of really got wrong, that probably got people a little messed up, was they overstate the danger of nuclear power. But, that's obviously just part of the show. But the one thing that Burns did is he built a dome over the town to try to block out the sunlight and make everybody use electric lights and things to, make up for the lost sunlight. And how does this play into self-reliance? Like, okay, this is a crazy idea, right? You're going to build this dome over a town. Like, that would never happen. That's the kind of feat that it would take for an authoritarian figure to control solar energy or wind energy. All right, that's the level of control that would be needed. Unlike oil and gas, where it comes from a centralized location, like a refinery, that serves millions and millions of people, all that the authoritarian actor would have to do is interrupt that operation. But if everybody, or every town, or every community, there's solar farms spread all over the place, or wind farms all over the place, that authoritarian actor would have to interrupt every single one of those. Especially if they were designed to operate as microgrids. They would have to interrupt a lot of them in order to have a big impact on the system. So it allows us to have an energy system that is more diffuse, more dispersed, and not as worrying about concentrated, centralized facilities. I see that as an advantage. And I see that as somebody who worries about national security and things like that. I see that as an advantage. So, let's see here. The other thing about conservatism that's often touted is personal freedom. Okay? We don't want the government telling us what to do. So the big, there was a big stink the past week about kitchen cooking stoves. The pundits were talking about how, oh my God, they're going to ban gas kitchen cooking stoves. And I'm looking at this stuff like, okay, you guys have just gone off the deep end here. Let's be real. Renewable energy requires spreading out the energy production over larger areas, geographically dispersed. It isn't something that you can just concentrate in one small location and send that out to millions of people. That makes it really hard for it to be manipulated. So like when we're talking about the gas cooking stove, somebody says, oh my God, they want everything to be on the grid so they can just shut us off. Okay, first of all, who's they? And the fact of the matter is that they could also shut off your gas. Natural gas is supplied through a system of tubes, a series of tubes, that can be turned off just as easily as a power grid. Right? So if I have renewable energy at my house, solar panels, and a good battery system, you can actually run your cooktop without any gas and without any power grid. That's a pretty nice feature to have. So electrification is not some means of authoritarian takeover of our lives. It's just a way to make our lives better so that we don't have to worry about combustion at the point of use. Electricity is effectively the ultimate energy source in a house. You don't have to be concerned about switching it to something else because that's all done at the point of generation. There's also no way for an individual person to manufacture the gas to run your gas stove unless you wanted to do the biogas digester in the backyard where you take your toilet and you flush it out to the digester and you make your own gas. I'm sure most conservatives, especially the ones who were worried about the Great Reset controversy of a few years ago, probably aren't going to be moving in that direction. Right? The whole eating bugs and back to nature idea didn't fit well with so many people. We're not doing that. That's not what's happening here. So, he's talked about the more diffuse energy source. Now, many people will make the argument that we need concentrated, high energy density resources. It's just not true, right? If you take a home, a residence, or even a industrial facilities, and you calculate the energy per square foot of those facilities, you're going to find that in most cases, in almost all cases, the power density is not that high. There's more than enough energy falling on the roof of the building than the building consumes. We don't need, weapons grade nuclear fuel to power, generate electricity for the power grid. It is not necessary. Solar and wind is more than sufficient. We do not need highly concentrated resources. Okay, I can't put a nuclear reactor in my house. I can't put a coal-fired power plant in my house because those technologies are just too complex for an individual to manage. And in some cases, it's impossible for you to get your hands on the equipment of that size of magnitude of scale to do it. You would not want to have a coal-fired power plant in your basement. Trust me, it just would not be a pleasant thing to deal with. If you consider the amount of coal that you would need just in and of itself, you're talking, many tons per year to generate electricity. It's about a pound per kilowatt hour in a commercial, large scale power plant. So let's just say that you get, that same efficiency, 10,000 kilowatts hour. You need 5 tons of coal at that efficiency for your average house. So a centralized grid is an absolute must, a communal grid. If I call it a communal grid, which is what it is, it may make people realize that this is a large system that's dependent upon many people putting input into it, no matter how much they use. So with renewable energy, we have the opportunity to move away from that enormous centralized model and get it from more local resources. And we're not as dependent upon large-scale, very expensive infrastructure for the generation of electricity or, obtaining fuel that we have to burn and then go back and get more. Okay, so that all plays into minimizing the possible influence of the federal government. Okay, once the system is up and running, it doesn't require constant welfare in the form of fuel or money or subsidies. So many people, like I said, have a vision of what renewable energy was 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, wind power and solar power, to construct them, to build the panels or to build the wind turbine, the amount of money that was required to do that was so much that you couldn't get a return on your investment in any reasonable amount of time, which is what made those resources expensive versus the coal and the natural gas and everything else. Hence the reason that back in those days, for them to play in the market, they had to be subsidized in some way. And in the United States, the way that we, on the federal level, chose to subsidize renewable energy was through tax credits. We basically said, okay, guys, build this thing, start making a profit, and once you start making your profit, you can take money off your taxes. All right? So that's what enabled renewable energy to go from this hippy-dippy cottage industry to a multi-billion-dollar operation. So that's, as much as people complain about it, about the idea of subsidies were needed at the beginning of renewable energy. They were needed at the beginning of nuclear energy, and nuclear energy was in fact invented, commercialized by the federal government as part of the nuclear navy program. The first nuclear power plant in the United States was experimental, and it was, commercial scale power plant at Shippingport was a Navy reactor that they stuffed into a building outside of Pittsburgh and ran it on land. And that power plant was not cheap. It produced very expensive electricity versus just using coal. But we did it anyways because we wanted to make this technology commercially viable. The same exact philosophy applies to renewable energy. Most conservative people that I know seem to be in favor of nuclear energy. And I can't tell whether it is because they see that technology as just being more cost effective, or if it's just a byproduct of the pacifist left that opposed it for so many years. They opposed it, so I'm going to be for it. So it's hard to really differentiate the politics. But nuclear energy was developed based upon subsidies. And now, renewable energy is available and subsidies are not required. That may be a surprise to many people, but it's the truth. Renewable energy in the form of solar is the cheapest source of electricity, the cheapest source of kilowatt hours that we know about right now. Wind is a close second, and then natural gas is the third. And natural gas is highly dependent upon the price of natural gas. So that value is kind of come up with probably with gas prices that are no longer that low, but I don't know for sure. But solar and wind, it doesn't matter because it's all based on the construction cost of the system. So a lot of people worry about this concept of promoting renewable energy. So there are tax credits still available in the Inflation Reduction Act. Those tax credits were supposed to be phased out in 2020, 2021 maybe, and phased down at least. And people thought that was going to put an end to the installation of renewable energy. Well, it did not do that. But because generally from the climate change side of things, basically say we're not switching to renewable energy fast enough, the tax credits were actually kept in place for renewable energy, and they added tax credits for nuclear power and carbon capture systems so that all of these energy sources have the opportunity to compete with each other on a level playing field, right? So we're not picking winners and losers, as it's often described. Never before has there been so much choice in the energy sources that we can use. right? 20 years ago, the idea of doing solar on your house, you were just a wacky nerd, hippie weirdo if you did something like that. It just wasn't done. And now it's very common. I think here in the Northeast, like 4% of homes have solar panels on their house. Okay, they also have incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act for reducing the amount of energy we consume. That's really important. If you're conservative, usually you are very much in favor of saving money. Okay, money comes in through your income. You don't want to be just spending that on energy, right? Insulation, improving the energy efficiency of buildings, the energy efficiency of vehicles. All is there, and all of it, I would hope, is supported by a conservative politician. The business case of this, I already said that renewable energy is the cheapest source of electricity generation. And when it is available, it is preferred. And this is really important because many people have this belief that renewable energy is this fickle, it never works, it's based upon variable, the wind. Every time we have a wind farm here near where I live, I could probably count, 4 or 5 people who've made the comment, oh, every time I go by the wind farm, the wind turbines aren't spinning. Like, I think you just have a cognitive bias to basically realize that they're not spinning because you think, they normally are spinning. That wind farm has a lower capacity factor of about, I think it's 30%. 30%. Oh, that sounds really bad, right? Well, it doesn't matter because the fuel is free. The wind is free, and it's economical to generate electricity using that wind, even if you are only using 30% on average capacity factor. When we're getting the energy, it's preferred. So the old school word for renewables was alternative energy. I hate that word. Actually, the word alternative gets applied to all sorts of things that make it's a form of othering. And it's very annoying in many cases, especially this one. But what's going on right now? Let's look at power grids that have very large amounts of renewables on them, like the United Kingdom has a lot of wind power. When the wind power varies, they use natural gas to fill in the variation depending upon demand. Basically, the difference between with supply and demand, they fill it in with natural gas. So whenever wind doesn't meet, natural gas is used to fill in the gaps. In that case, fossil fuels is the actual alternative energy source. It's the one that we use only when we need it. When the wind isn't supplying enough, we add in fossil fuel. So we should start calling fossil fuels alternative energy, because in the operations of power grids, renewable energy is preferred because it has zero marginal cost, right? It doesn't cost anything extra to run it. So when it's running and whatever it's producing, which varies, we use it. It's important to realize that wind and solar are often described as intermittent energy sources. That's a poor term as well because it insinuates that we either have full blast or nothing. Reality of it is that there's usually something in between 0 and 100%. It's not all or nothing. So if we look at the what it actually does cost to generate electricity from these various energy sources, the conservative side of things, should really be looking down here and finding ways to make our system accept more and more of these energy sources. Wind, solar, and of course natural gas are the cheapest. Geothermal and everything above it. Geothermal is actually listed as cheaper than coal, which is pretty interesting. We don't have a whole lot of geothermal just because it's cheaper just to build wind and build solar, right? But the most amazing part about this, now this chart is derived from data from a financial firm called Lazard. They publish research on called the levelized cost of electricity. based upon, this is effectively the cost per megawatt hour of electricity once you take out all the subsidies. So there's no subsidies or any tax credits included in here. And even when you remove the tax credits that are in the Inflation Reduction Act or any other, government incentive program, wind and solar are still the cheapest energy sources. We have, back in 2010, solar power from solar panels was $350 per megawatt hour. Today, it's like $35 per megawatt hour. We reduced the cost by a factor of 10. Now you can imagine this. This is why renewable energy is suddenly such a big deal, because they followed this curve, this immense reduction in cost of these technologies. Wind actually got cheaper way back here in the 2000s. That's why you don't see it on this chart. But it was expensive too, back in like the 90s. And then through the 2000s dropped down to, $100, and now it's about the same as solar, $35. So it saves you money. So the more of this energy we put onto the system, the less fossil fuel we have to burn, the cheaper the electricity can become. Obviously, the electricity market has to be designed to accept that type of a cost structure. The costs are all front loaded. So basically the wind farm, the solar farm is built, and almost all of the cost is right there up front. There's very little maintenance that you have to do on a solar farm, and relatively little maintenance on a wind farm over its operating life of several decades. So it's just cheap energy. Okay, what I'm calling here is global fish markets. Go back to the analogy about teaching a man to fish. That's like the oil and gas market, which are global markets. So whatever the price for crude oil is, it does not matter if the United States produces all of its crude oil domestically. We follow the price of the entire world because that oil can be fungible, it's traded everywhere, and we can produce as much as we want, but if the world price swings around, it's going to affect the price we pay. Renewable energy that's generated from into electricity isn't susceptible to that because it is not tied into a global market. It is hyper local to where it is currently, actually being collected from the environment. So the other thing is I look at the health and safety of people that I care about and myself. You don't generate any air pollution with renewable energy, right? You're not creating wastewater, especially with solar and wind. They don't use any water at all. You don't have, byproducts of extraction of the actual fuel. This is really important because there's been a big controversy that has gained traction on a lot of the cable news networks over the issue of mining for what they're calling critical minerals for creating renewable energy equipment. Now we'll just talk about a solar panel. This solar panel, the materials that are in here are not that complex. We got aluminum, we have glass, we have silicon, which is basically, the second most common element in the Earth's crust that makes up the solar cells. It's purified silicon. We have a little bit of solder in there, silver paste on the cells, very small quantities. Some backsheet plastic and a wire. Right? There's nothing here that is crazy, complex, rare materials. Right? Wind turbines, direct drive wind turbines will use magnets, which most wind turbines are not direct drive, but there are direct drive turbines that use a rare earth magnet, and that's all the focus of, oh my God, rare earths, the only place that we have those is China. We can't keep scapegoating China on all this stuff. And I find that the politics basically just goes and they blame China for all sorts of problems. We have the opportunity to do all this technology ourselves if we're so worried about it. But at the end of the day, it isn't that important, because once you have it, okay, so let's say we buy all of our solar panels from China. China ships them over here. Once we have them, guess what? They're ours, and China cannot control them. So put them in the sun, they'll generate electricity for decades, and there's nothing that any foreign nation or authoritarian actor can do to stop it, outside of just bombing, vast swaths of land. There's nothing they can do to stop it. So we have to mine materials to manufacture the equipment. But when you consider that this solar panel, and obviously this is a tiny solar panel, but this thing weighs, say 4 pounds or so. If I put this out in the sun, over a year, it would create 40 pounds worth of its weight, or 40 pounds worth of coal of electricity. So to replace this, I would need to burn 40 pounds of coal for a 4-pound solar panel. Wow, that's a 10x difference. And if you consider this lasts for 20, 30, 40 years, probably more like, let's say 30 average, it's 300 times more coal has to be mined to generate the same amount of electricity as this entire panel weighs. So which thing do you think has a greater environmental impact when it comes to mining? It's the one where we have to constantly burn fuel, not the one where we extract it once and then use it, just use it to collect energy from the sun. I've heard people state things like wind turbines and solar panels use more energy than they create. Think about that for a second. If that was true, it would make zero sense to use this stuff. But yet, last year we added 300 gigawatts of solar. Dozens of nuke plants worth of solar were added. Do you think that hundreds of billions of dollars would be spent on a technology that uses more energy than it creates? Or that costs more money than it makes? If that's the case, there's a conspiracy theory that is so far out there that I can't even begin to imagine. Right? Almost everybody, I would think that everybody cares very much about conserving the environment, keeping things from harming people, harming wildlife, harming ecosystems. Right? Every energy technology has an environmental impact. Every single one of them does. And there seems to be this attitude on the environmentalist left that Republicans and conservatives, they don't care about keeping the water clean, keeping the air clean. That's just not true. Right? It's ridiculous to believe that. It's just that the way that we go about it, the way that they go about it is a little different than, it's a little bit different. We see it a little bit differently in terms of what and how we value things. The big thing that I see that is going on here is you're not much different than supposed enemies. When you really, really think about it, these big differences don't exist. And unfortunately, we're whipping ourselves into a frenzy over the idea, we want to build a solar farm that could build, or a wind farm that could bring in millions of dollars a year in revenue to a rural area. And if somebody's opposed to that, typically the conservative and Republican side of politics has been very much pro-business. And wind energy and solar energy is just that. It's a business. It's not a bunch of hippies around a campfire singing Kumbaya. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it's really bizarre when I find and I see politics getting into these protests about a wind farm or a solar farm, that otherwise, if an automobile manufacturer said it was going to build a plant in the same area, that the politicians would be standing in front of it shaking hands with the CEO and cutting a ribbon after they handed out tax credit after tax credit. But yet wind farms, you get this sort of cold-handed approach to the same exact idea of making money. So I would hope that as the technology grows and becomes more commonplace, we get over our arguments and we get over our supposed differences, and we'll be all in good shape and have lots of renewable energy. So that's pretty much it. Don't buy the hype that somebody is going to come and take away your fossil fuels. Don't buy the hype that tomorrow men in black are going to show up at your front door and rip your gas stove out of your kitchen. Don't buy the hype that you're going to have to switch to an electric car if you don't want an electric car. That's just not true. Nobody is forcing anybody to do anything. All right? Incentives are not, the same thing as forcing somebody to do something. That's the classic thing that I just see is somebody views an incentive as, well, they're going to tell me how to live my life. Not really. It's just not true. So you got to realize about renewable energy is that despite all of the hype from the environmentalist popular media, this stuff is all being designed by engineers who understand the limitations and understand how to work around them and make everything work together. And sometimes that includes using fossil fuels as an alternative energy source when you don't have renewable energy available. Right? That's how grid tie solar works. When there's not enough sunlight to meet the load in the house, it comes off the power grid. When there's more sunlight than the load in the house, it sells it back to the power grid. At the end of the year, my electricity consumption is 0. So that's pretty much it. Like I said, it might seem like the popular voices are glossing over the downsides of the technology, when in reality, they're all being taken into account and everything's being made to work together. There's nobody that's just blindly building this stuff and thinking that it's unicorn farts and fairy dust that's going to power everything. We've got it under control. So that's pretty much it. Long kind of reasons why I think that renewable energy should appeal to conservative politics. So it could be, there's a lot there to really, discuss. But at the end of the day, these weekly, controversies about renewable energy on the internet are effectively meaningless. They've done absolutely nothing to stop the growth of renewable energy. And to believe that renewable energy is only growing because some, utopian environmental group is pushing it is totally blind to the economics of the technology. So let you get back to your normally scheduled programming.